The stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the Roswell, New Mexico General Store, and Theresa Dawn stepped down onto the dusty street with nothing but a carpetbag, a letter of introduction to a man she had never met, and a terrible secret that made her hands shake as she smoothed her travel-worn dress. It was August 1878, and the afternoon sun beat down mercilessly on the small desert town, turning the air thick and shimmering with heat. Theresa had traveled for 3 weeks from Boston, answering an advertisement for a mail-order bride placed by a rancher named Marcus Whitley. The arrangement had seemed like salvation when she had first read it in the newspaper, a way to escape the suffocating expectations of her family and the scandal that would have destroyed her if she had stayed. But now, standing in this unfamiliar place with the dust settling on her best traveling dress, she felt the weight of what she had done pressing down on her chest. A tall man with graying hair and a weathered face approached her with measured steps. He removed his hat, revealing a mostly bald head, and studied her with pale blue eyes that held neither warmth nor particular interest. "Miss Dawn." His voice was flat, businesslike. "Yes, Mr. Whitley, that would be me." He picked up her bag without ceremony. "The ranch is an hour's ride. We'll need to get supplies first, then head out before dark." Theresa followed him into the general store, her heart sinking with each step. This was the man she was supposed to marry in 3 days' time, this stranger who looked at her the way one might assess a horse at auction. But what choice did she have? Her father had made it clear that if she refused this arrangement, she would be on her own, disowned and penniless. At 22 years old, with no prospects and no acceptable skills for a woman of her former social standing, this had been her only option. Inside the store, Marcus began ordering supplies in that same flat voice, and Theresa wandered toward the back, pretending to examine bolts of fabric while trying to calm her racing thoughts. That was when she heard the argument. "I said I needed on credit, Samuel." The voice was deep, warm, and currently edged with frustration. "The bank's holding up my loan for another week, but my fence posts are rotting through and I've got cattle wandering onto the Johnsons' property every other day. Can't do it, Zeke. Your credit's already stretched thin as paper. Cash only." The shopkeeper's voice was apologetic but firm. Theresa peered around the fabric display and saw him. He was perhaps 26 or 27, tall and lean with the kind of build that came from hard physical work. His dark hair needed cutting, falling nearly to his collar beneath a battered hat, and he had several days' worth of stubble on his strong jaw. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, dark brown and expressive, currently burning with barely contained frustration and what looked like desperation. "Samuel, I've been a customer here for 5 years. I've always paid my debts, and you will again, I'm sure. But my suppliers want cash, and I can't keep extending credit when I've got my own bills to pay. I'm sorry, Zeke." The young cowboy, Zeke, ran a hand through his hair and turned away, his shoulders tense with defeat. As he did, his eyes met Theresa's for just a moment. She saw pride there, wounded by the humiliation of this public rejection, and something else. Something lost and lonely that resonated with her own feelings so strongly that she had to look away. He strode past her and out of the store, the door slamming behind him hard enough to rattle the glass. "Don't mind Zeke Turner," the shopkeeper said, noticing Theresa's attention. "Good man, hard worker, but he's had a rough time of it. Bought himself a small ranch 2 years back, been barely scraping by ever since. His father died last winter, left him with debts on top of his own. He'll pull through, though. He's got grit, that one." Marcus appeared at Theresa's elbow. "Got everything we need. Let's go." The ride to the Whitley ranch was uncomfortable and mostly silent. Marcus drove the wagon with single-minded focus, occasionally commenting on landmarks or property boundaries, but never asking Theresa anything about herself. She tried a few times to start a conversation, to find some common ground with this man she was meant to marry, but his responses were brief and discouraging. The ranch itself was substantial, a large house with a wide porch and several outbuildings. Marcus clearly had means, which should have been reassuring. Instead, Theresa felt increasingly trapped as he showed her to a spare bedroom where she would stay until the wedding. Dinner's at 6. Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, will call you when it's ready. She'll help you settle in. He started to leave, then paused in the doorway. I should mention that I expect a proper household. Mrs. Chen does the cooking now, but once we're married, that'll be your responsibility. And the mending, the preserving, all of it. She's getting too old for the work, and I need a wife who can manage a home properly. After he left, Theresa sank onto the narrow bed and stared at her trembling hands. She could not cook. She could not sew. She had been raised in a wealthy Boston household where such tasks were handled by servants. Her education had consisted of music, a bit of French, and enough arithmetic to manage a household budget. Her mother had always said she would marry well and have her own servants to manage. The irony of her current situation was not lost on her. Mrs. Chen appeared a few minutes later, a small Chinese woman who looked to be in her 60s, with kind eyes that took in Theresa's distress immediately. "First time in the territory?" she asked gently. "First time west of Philadelphia," Theresa admitted. "It is very different here, but you will learn. Everything can be learned if you have the will for it." Mrs. Chen began unpacking Theresa's carpetbag, her efficient hands smoothing out wrinkled dresses. She paused when she found a small leather-bound book at the bottom. "What is this?" "Poetry, Lord Byron. It was my mother's." Theresa took it carefully, the only thing she had brought that had any sentimental value. "You read poetry?" Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "That is good. A person needs beauty in their life, not just work. Though I will tell you, Mr. Whitley does not care much for such things." Over dinner that evening, Theresa's fears were confirmed. Marcus spoke only of ranch business, of cattle prices and water rights and the new railroad spur that might come through in a few years. He did not ask about her journey or her life in Boston. He did not seem to notice when she barely touched her food. When she mentioned that she had once seen a traveling theater production in Boston, he looked at her with something close to disdain. "Won't be any of that nonsense out here. Too much work to be done for idle entertainment." That night, Theresa lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the strange sounds of the desert night and trying not to cry. She had made a terrible mistake, but there was no way back. Her father had been clear in his final letter. She had embarrassed the family by refusing to marry the man they had chosen for her, a wealthy merchant 3 times her age with wandering hands and a cruel mouth. When she had run away and answered Marcus's advertisement instead, her father had written to say she was no longer his daughter. The money for her stage-coach ticket had been the last penny she would ever receive from him. She had chosen this path, and now she would have to walk it, no matter where it led. The next morning, Mrs. Chen woke her at dawn and brought her to the kitchen. "Mr. Whitley says you should start learning the household routine. Can you make breakfast?" Theresa looked at the enormous cast-iron stove, the various pots and pans, the sacks of flour and cornmeal, and felt panic rising in her throat. "I don't know how. I have never cooked anything in my life." Mrs. Chen's eyebrows rose. "Never we had a cook. I was never allowed in the kitchen. My mother said it was not proper for a lady." "I see." Mrs. Chen was quiet for a moment, then began pulling out ingredients. "Then we start with something simple. Coffee and biscuits. Watch carefully." Theresa tried. She truly did. But her first attempt at biscuits came out of the oven as hard as rocks. The coffee was bitter and full of grounds. When Marcus came in for breakfast and saw the results, his expression darkened. "I was told you were educated, cultured. I assumed that meant you could manage a household. I can manage the budget, keep accounts, write correspondence. I need a wife who can cook and clean and mend, not write poetry." He pushed his plate away. "Mrs. Chen, I'll have my usual." "Miss Dawn, perhaps you should spend today learning something useful." He left, and Theresa stood in the kitchen feeling smaller than she ever had in her life. Mrs. Chen put a gentle hand on her arm. "Do not let him make you feel worthless. You have other gifts. But yes, you must learn these things if you are to survive here. Come, we try again." They spent the entire day in the kitchen. Theresa burned 2 more batches of biscuits, ruined a pot of beans, and nearly set her sleeve on fire. Her hands, unused to such work, grew red and sore. By evening, she was exhausted and discouraged, and when Marcus came in for dinner, the meal Mrs. Chen served was entirely her own work, not Theresa's. After he left the table, Theresa helped Mrs. Chen with the dishes, her eyes stinging with tears she refused to shed. "He is not a bad man, Mrs. Chen said quietly. "But he is a hard one. He lost his first wife 5 years ago in childbirth. The baby died too. He has not been the same since. He wants a wife to run his household, but I do not think he wants to open his heart again." "I cannot give him what he needs," Theresa whispered. "I cannot cook or clean or do any of the things he expects, and I don't think I can learn quickly enough." "Then perhaps this is not the right match." Mrs. Chen looked at her seriously. "It is not too late to change your mind. The wedding is not for 2 more days. I have nowhere else to go. No money, no family who will take me back." Theresa dried the last plate with shaking hands. "This is my only choice." But that night, as she lay in bed, she knew she could not go through with it. Marcus deserved a wife who could be a true partner to him, and she deserved a chance at something more than this cold arrangement. In the morning, she would tell him the truth and ask him to send her back to town. Perhaps she could find work as a teacher or a shop girl. It would be difficult, but it had to be better than a loveless marriage built on false pretenses. She finally fell asleep as the moon was setting and woke to shouting. Dawnlight was just beginning to creep through her window as she rushed out of her room and down the stairs. Marcus was in the front hall pulling on his boots while Mrs. Chen stood wringing her hands. "What's happened?" "Fire at the Turner place," Marcus said curtly. "Whole town's going out to help fight it. Stay here." He was gone before she could respond, and through the window, Theresa could see an orange glow on the eastern horizon. The Turner place. That was the young cowboy from the general store, the one with the desperate eyes and wounded pride. "Can I help?" she asked Mrs. Chen. "Not with the fire. But we can prepare food and water for when the men come back. They will be exhausted and hungry." Mrs. Chen was already heading for the kitchen. They spent the morning preparing, and this time, with no pressure and no judgment, Theresa found herself following Mrs. Chen's instructions more successfully. She made sandwiches, slicing bread and meat with careful precision. She learned how to make lemonade from the precious lemons Mrs. Chen kept in the cold cellar. She helped pack everything into baskets. When Marcus returned near noon, his face was black with soot and his eyes were red-rimmed. Other men came with him, a dozen ranchers and cowboys from neighboring properties, all of them looking exhausted and grim. "The house is gone," one of them was saying as they gathered on the porch. "Barn too. He saved the animals, but that's about all. Poor kid's got nothing left." "Where is he now?" another asked. "Sitting in what used to be his yard, just staring at the ashes. Won't talk to anyone. I think he's in shock." Theresa brought out lemonade and sandwiches, and the men accepted gratefully. too tired to do more than nod their thanks. She listened as they talked, piecing together the story. Zeke Turner's house had caught fire in the night, likely from a problem with the chimney. He had barely escaped with his life, had managed to get his horse and 2 cattle dogs out, but everything else was gone. The small herd of cattle he had been building, scattered. His barn and all his equipment, destroyed. The house his father had built 20 years ago, reduced to smoking timbers. "Someone should stay with him," Mrs. Chen said quietly to Marcus. "He should not be alone." "I'll go back out this afternoon," Marcus said. "See if he'll come here for a few days until he figures out what to do next." But when Marcus returned that evening, he was alone. Won't leave, won't talk. Just keep sitting there. Damn stubborn fool is going to make himself sick. Theresa made a decision. "I will take him some food and blankets. He'll need blankets." "He won't accept charity," Marcus said flatly. "Too proud." "Then I won't call it charity." Theresa was already gathering supplies, driven by something she did not quite understand. Maybe it was because she recognized that lost look in Zeke's eyes. Maybe it was because she understood what it felt like to have your entire world collapse around you. "I'll just take it. He doesn't have to accept anything, but at least it will be there if he needs it." Marcus looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too tired. "Take the small wagon. Be back before dark." The ride to the Turner place took nearly 45 minutes, following the directions Mrs. Chen provided. As she got closer, the smell of smoke grew stronger, and then she saw it. The house was indeed completely gone, just a black skeleton of timber and a pile of still smoking rubble. The barn was the same. In the middle of what had once been a small yard, a man sat on the ground, his back against the only thing still standing, a stone well. Theresa stopped the wagon at a respectful distance and climbed down, carrying a basket of food and a bundle of blankets. She approached slowly, aware that she was intruding on a very private grief. Zeke Turner did not look up as she approached. His face was streaked with soot and what might have been tears. His clothes were singed and filthy, and his hands were blistered and raw. He looked like a man who had lost everything because he had. "Mr. Turner," her voice was soft. "I'm Theresa Dawn. I brought you some food and blankets. I'll just leave them here." She set the basket and blankets down a few feet away from him and started to turn back to the wagon. "Why?" His voice was hoarse, raw from smoke and emotion. She turned back. "Because you need them. Don't need charity from Whitley's mail-order bride." There was bitterness in his voice, but also bone-deep exhaustion. "It's not from Mr. Whitley. It's from me. And it's not charity, it's common decency." She surprised herself with the sharpness in her tone. "You've lost your home. You're sitting here without food or shelter, and night's coming. You can be proud or you can be sensible, but either way, I'm leaving these supplies here." For the first time he looked up at her, and she saw his eyes clearly in the late afternoon light. They were dark brown, almost black, and full of such pain that her breath caught. "Everything's gone," he said, and his voice cracked. "Everything my father built, everything I've worked for. All of it just gone." Without thinking, Theresa sat down on the ground beside him, not caring about her dress or propriety. "I'm sorry. What does a fancy Boston lady know about losing everything?" But there was no real anger in his question, just weariness. "More than you might think." She looked at the ruins of his house. "I left my family, my home, everything I knew to come here and marry a man I'd never met. My father disowned me. I have no money, no prospects, and I've discovered that I have none of the skills necessary to survive in this place. So maybe I do understand a little bit about watching your whole world burn down." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, "You're marrying Whitley in 2 days." "I'm supposed to, but I don't think I will. I can't be what he needs, and he certainly isn't what I need." "So what will you do?" I have absolutely no idea. She found herself almost laughing at the absurdity of it. But I suppose we're both in difficult situations, aren't we? The faintest hint of something that was not quite a smile touched his mouth. Guess so. They sat in silence as the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and red. Finally, Zeke reached for the basket and opened it, pulling out a sandwich. He ate mechanically, like a man who had not realized he was hungry until food was in front of him. Mrs. Chen made most of it, Theresa admitted. I'm learning, but I'm not very good yet. Mrs. Chen's a fine cook. He finished the sandwich and took a long drink from the canteen she had brought. Thank you for coming out here. You didn't have to. I wanted to. She stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. I should get back before dark, but Mr. Turner, you shouldn't stay out here alone. It's not safe and you need rest. Got nowhere else to go, and it's Zeke, not Mr. Turner. Then you should at least use the blankets. And there's more food in the basket. I'll come back tomorrow with fresh supplies. Why would you do that? He looked up at her, genuine confusion in his eyes. You don't know me. No, but I think I understand you a little bit. Sometimes that's enough. She left him there as the last light faded from the sky and drove the wagon back to the Whitley ranch with her mind spinning. There was something about Zeke Turner that called to her, something beyond the obvious tragedy of his situation. Perhaps it was recognition. Two lost souls who had both watched their lives fall apart. When she arrived back at the ranch, Marcus was waiting on the porch, his expression dark. You were gone a long time. I'm sorry. I wanted to make sure he was all right. She climbed down from the wagon, her legs stiff from the ride. Turner's problems are not your concern. You have enough to worry about, learning to manage a household. Something in his tone, the dismissive way he spoke of Zeke's tragedy, made anger flare in Theresa's chest. A man has lost everything he owned, and you think my inability to make proper biscuits is more important. Marcus's face went hard. What I think is that you need to focus on your responsibilities here. You're going to be my wife in 2 days. No. The word came out before she could stop it. No, I'm not. What? I can't marry you, Mr. Whitley. I'm sorry, but I can't. You deserve a wife who can be a true partner to you, who has the skills you need. That's not me. I don't belong here. For a moment, Marcus just stared at her. Then, surprisingly, his expression softened slightly. You're scared. That's natural, but you'll learn. It's not about learning. It's about what we both want from a marriage. You want a housekeeper, and you deserve to have that. But I want something more than a business arrangement, and I deserve that too. Love. He said the word like it tasted bitter. You're waiting for love, is that it? This is the frontier, Miss Dawn, not a story in a ladies' magazine. Love doesn't put food on the table or keep a ranch running. Maybe not, but it should mean something. A marriage should mean something. She held his gaze steadily. I'll leave in the morning. I'll find a way to pay you back for my stagecoach ticket and keep it. I don't want your money. He turned away, his shoulders rigid. Mrs. Chen will help you pack. The morning stage goes through town at 10. He walked into the house, and Theresa stood alone in the dark yard, feeling strangely free despite the terror of her uncertain future. Mrs. Chen appeared beside her a moment later. That took courage, the older woman said softly. What will you do? Find work in town, I hope. Perhaps as a teacher or a seamstress's assistant. Even as she said it, she knew the irony. She could not sew either, or perhaps something else will present itself. Mrs. Chen's eyes were knowing. Life has a way of surprising us when we are brave enough to choose our own path. That night, Theresa packed her few belongings and lay awake planning. She had perhaps $5 in coins, money she had hidden in her carpet bag for emergencies. It was not much, but it would have to be enough to survive on while she found work. The town of Roswell was small, but it was growing. There had to be some opportunity for her, But in the morning, before she could leave for town, she asked Marcus if she could borrow the wagon one more time, to say goodbye to Turner. He was not pleased, but he nodded. 1 hour. Then Mrs. Chen will drive you to town. She took more supplies, everything she could carry, including some of her own clothes that might be cut up for bandages or cleaning cloths. When she arrived at the burned property, she found Zeke attempting to clear debris with his bare hands, his face set in grim determination despite his obvious exhaustion. "You came back." He stopped working when he saw her. "I said I would." She set down the supplies and looked at the small progress he had made. "You need help. Can't afford to hire anyone." "I wasn't asking for payment." She picked up a piece of charred timber and carried it to the pile he was making. "I'm leaving the Whitley ranch today. I'm not marrying him. So I have a few hours before I need to catch the stage to town, and I might as well do something useful with them." Zeke stared at her. "You're not marrying him. Why?" "Because I cannot cook or sew or do any of the things he needs. Because he wants a business arrangement and I want something more. Because this is my life and I should have some say in how I live it." She picked up another piece of timber. "Are you going to help me clear this debris or just stand there?" For the first time since she had met him, Zeke Turner smiled. It transformed his face, made him look younger and more alive. "You're full of surprises, Miss Dawn. Call me Theresa. And you have not seen half of my surprises yet." They worked together for 2 hours, clearing the worst of the debris and sorting what could be salvaged. It was not much. Some tools that had been in the barn, a few kitchen implements that had somehow survived, a trunk of clothes that had been in a corner of the house and was charred but intact. As they worked, they talked, and Theresa found herself telling him things she had not planned to share. About her life in Boston, about the suffocating expectations and the marriage she had refused, about her father's coldness and her desperate flight west. In turn, Zeke told her about his father, a hard but loving man who had come to New Mexico as a young man with dreams of building something lasting. About his mother, who had died when Zeke was 12, leaving his father to raise him alone. About his own dreams of building the ranch into something successful, dreams that now lay in ashes at their feet. "I don't know what to do now," he admitted as they finally stopped to rest, sitting on the edge of the stone well and sharing water from the canteen. "I can't rebuild without money and I can't get money without something to sell. All my cattle are scattered. My equipment is gone. The bank won't extend my loan any further. I'm finished." "You're not finished. You're just facing a setback." Theresa surprised herself with the conviction in her voice. "You're young and healthy and strong. You have skills. You know ranching and cattle. That's worth something." "Not enough." He looked at the ruins of his life. "Maybe I should just sell the land and move on, start over somewhere else." "Is that what you want?" He was quiet for a long time. Then, "No, this is my home. My father's buried on the ridge above the north pasture. This land means something to me. But wanting something and being able to keep it are two different things." Mrs. Chen arrived with the wagon before Theresa could respond, come to collect her for the trip to town. As Theresa gathered her things, Zeke stood and held out his hand. "Thank you. For everything. You didn't have to be kind to a stranger, but you were. I won't forget that." She took his hand, feeling the roughness of his calloused palm, the strength in his grip. "I hope things get better for you, Zeke Turner. I hope you find what you're looking for in town, Theresa Dawn." But as Mrs. Chen drove her toward Roswell, Theresa could not stop thinking about him. About the determination in his eyes despite his losses, about the gentleness in his voice when he spoke of his father, about the way he had smiled when she had started working beside him without being asked. "You care for him," Mrs. Chen said quietly. "I barely know him." Sometimes that is when we see people most clearly, before we know enough to make judgments or have expectations." Mrs. Chen glanced at her. "He is a good man. Poor and unlucky right now, but good. That counts for more than money or land in the end. What are you suggesting?" But Theresa's heart was already beating faster. "I am suggesting nothing. I am simply observing." Mrs. Chen smiled slightly. "You will do what is right for you, but do not let fear make your choices. You have already shown great courage in refusing Mr. Whitley. Trust that courage. In town, Mrs. Chen helped her find a room at the boarding house, run by a widow named Mrs. Patterson, a formidable woman who looked Theresa up and down with sharp eyes before quoting a price of $2 per week, including 2 meals a day. "I can give you a week paid in advance," Theresa said, handing over half her precious savings. "By then I hope to have found employment." "What kind of work are you looking for?" Mrs. Patterson asked. "Teaching, perhaps, or shop work. I can read and write and do figures." Mrs. Patterson snorted. "Town's got a teacher already, and she's younger than you with more experience. As for shop work, most folks around here prefer to hire men who can lift heavy goods. Can you cook or clean?" "I'm learning to cook. And I can clean, I suppose." Though she had never actually done much of it. "I could use help with the boarding house. Cooking, cleaning, laundry. Hard work, but I'd pay you 50 cents a day plus your room and board. Interested?" It was not what Theresa had imagined, but it was honest work and it solved her immediate problem. "Yes, thank you. Don't thank me yet. You'll earn every penny. We start at 5 in the morning." Mrs. Patterson was not exaggerating. The work was backbreaking. Hauling water, scrubbing floors, washing sheets in the big copper tub out back, cooking for 6 boarders plus Mrs. Patterson herself. Theresa's hands, already sore from helping Zeke clear debris, became blistered and raw. Her back ached constantly. She fell into bed each night too exhausted to do anything but sleep. But she was surviving. She was making her own way, and she was learning. Mrs. Patterson was a stern taskmaster but a good teacher, showing Theresa how to manage the big stove, how to get stains out of linens, how to make meals stretch further than seemed possible. Slowly, Theresa began to gain confidence in her abilities. She had been working for Mrs. Patterson for nearly a week when she saw Zeke again. He came into town one afternoon, riding a borrowed horse and looking gaunt and tired. She was sweeping the porch of the boarding house when he passed by and their eyes met. He stopped. "Theresa." "Hello, Zeke." She set down the broom and came to the edge of the porch. "How are things?" "Managing. Barely." He dismounted and tied the horse to the rail. "I've been working for some of the other ranchers, day labor, trying to earn enough to buy lumber and supplies. It's slow going. But you're rebuilding." "Trying to. Got the frame of a small cabin started. It'll be nowhere near as nice as what my father built, but it'll be shelter." He looked at her more carefully. "You look tired." "I'm working for Mrs. Patterson. It's hard work, but honest. You're too educated to be scrubbing floors." She bristled slightly. "There's no shame in honest work, no matter what kind it is. I'm learning valuable skills and earning my own keep. That's more than I could say when I first arrived." He held up his hands in apology. "You're right. I'm sorry. I just meant you deserve better. We both deserve better than what we have right now. But we're both working toward it, aren't we?" She softened her tone. "Have you eaten today?" "Not since morning." "Come around back. I'll fix you a plate. Mrs. Patterson won't mind, and you look like you could use a good meal." In the kitchen, she prepared food for him, simple fare but filling, and watched as he ate with the focused intensity of someone who had been hungry for too long. When he was done, he looked at her with something like wonder. "You cooked this?" "I did. It's just stew and bread, nothing fancy, but Mrs. Patterson says I'm getting better." She felt absurdly proud of this accomplishment. It was good, really good. He pushed his plate away and studied her. You've changed since I first met you. You seem more sure of yourself." "I feel more sure." "When I first arrived, I was terrified all the time. I didn't know how to do anything useful and I felt like I was drowning. But now I'm learning that I'm stronger than I thought, that I can learn and adapt." She sat down across from him. "What about you? Are you managing all right out there alone?" "It's lonely," he admitted. "I'm not used to having no one to talk to at the end of the day. My father and we'd sit on the porch after dinner and talk about the ranch, about plans for the future. Now it's just me and silence." An idea formed in Theresa's mind, probably foolish but feeling right nonetheless. "I have Sundays off. I could come out and help you. Extra hands would make the work go faster, wouldn't they? I can't pay you. I'm not asking for payment. I'm offering help. There's a difference." He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his expression, something warm and wondering. "Why would you do that? Why would you spend your one day off helping a near stranger rebuild his life?" "Because you need help. Because I want to. Because maybe we're not such strangers after all." She met his gaze steadily. "Is that reason enough? More than enough?" His voice was rough with emotion. "Thank you, Theresa." So began a pattern that would define the next 2 months. 6 days a week, Theresa worked for Mrs. Patterson, learning to cook and clean and manage a household. On Sundays, she borrowed a horse from the livery stable and rode out to Zeke's property, where they worked together to rebuild what the fire had destroyed. The cabin took shape slowly, board by board, nail by nail. It was small, just 2 rooms, but solid. They worked well together, falling into an easy rhythm. Zeke would do the heavy work, the lifting and hammering, while Theresa helped with the smaller tasks, holding boards steady, passing tools, mixing mortar for the stone chimney they were building. As they worked, they talked. Theresa told him about the books she loved, the poetry she had memorized, her dreams of seeing more of the world. Zeke told her about the land, teaching her the names of desert plants and how to read the sky for weather, sharing his knowledge of cattle and horses and the rhythms of ranch life. They talked about deeper things too. About loss and loneliness, about fear and hope, about what it meant to start over when everything familiar was gone. They discovered they shared a similar sense of humor, a similar way of seeing the world that was both practical and romantic. They made each other laugh even in the midst of exhausting work. And slowly, without either of them quite meaning it to happen, they fell in love. It was not a sudden thing, not a lightning bolt or a passionate declaration. It was gradual, like the cabin rising board by board. It was in the way Zeke made sure she had water when she was thirsty, the way he worried about her riding back to town alone in the evening. It was in the way Theresa saved the best portions of meals from the boarding house to bring him, the way she noticed when he was tired or discouraged and found ways to lift his spirits. It was in the way they looked at each other when they thought the other was not paying attention. By late October, the cabin was nearly finished and the weather was beginning to turn cooler. Theresa arrived one Sunday to find Zeke pacing in the yard, clearly agitated. "What's wrong?" "The bank sent a letter. They're calling in my loan. I have 30 days to pay what I owe or they'll foreclose on the property." He looked at her with desperation in his eyes. "I've been working every day, taking any job I can find, but I'm nowhere close to having enough money. I'm going to lose the land, Theresa. Everything my father worked for, everything I've tried to build, it's all going to be gone." Without thinking, she went to him and took his hands. "How much do you need?" $200. "I might as well need 2,000. There's no way I can raise that kind of money in a month." His shoulders sagged with defeat. "Maybe it's time to accept that I can't do this, that I'm not strong enough or smart enough or lucky enough to make this work." "Don't say that. You're one of the strongest, smartest, most determined people I've ever met." She tightened her grip on his hands. There has to be a way. What if you sold some of the cattle you've rounded up? Not enough of them, and they're not fattened up enough to bring good prices. I'd be lucky to get $50 for the lot. They spent the rest of the day working on the cabin, but the joy had gone out of it. Zeke was quiet and withdrawn, and Theresa's mind raced, trying to think of a solution. She had saved nearly $15 from her work at the boarding house, but that was nowhere near enough. She had no other resources, no family to turn to, nothing of value to sell except the thought hit her as she was riding back to town that evening. Her mother's poetry book. It was a first edition Lord Byron, and her mother had always said it was quite valuable. Theresa had no idea if that was true, but it was the only thing she owned that might be worth something. The next morning, she took the book to the general store and asked Samuel if he knew anyone who might want to buy it. "Let me see." He examined it carefully, his eyebrows rising. "This is in excellent condition. First edition, you say? I know a book collector over in Las Cruces who might be interested. I could send him a telegram." "How much might it be worth?" "Hard to say. Maybe $20, maybe more. I'll find out." It took a week for the response to come back. $40. The collector was willing to pay $40 for the book. It was more than Theresa had dared hope, and yet still far from what Zeke needed. She sold it anyway and added the money to her own savings. $55 total. Not enough, but something. That Sunday, she found Zeke finishing the roof of the cabin, and she could see the defeat in every line of his body. When he climbed down the ladder, she handed him the small cloth bag containing the money. "What's this?" $55. "It's not enough, I know, but it's something." "It's a start." He opened the bag and stared at the money, then at her. "Where did you get this?" "I saved it from my wages, and I sold my mother's book." She tried to keep her voice steady, not wanting him to hear the grief of that sacrifice. "No." He tried to hand it back. "I can't take this." "That book was precious to you. You're more precious to me." The words came out before she could stop them, and they hung in the air between them, changing everything. Zeke's expression transformed, a mixture of wonder and disbelief. "Theresa, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you, Zeke Turner. I'm saying that your dreams matter to me as much as my own. I'm saying I want to help you save this land because it's important to you and you're important to me." Her voice shook, but she kept going. "I'm saying that I know I cannot cook very well yet, and I cannot sew at all, but I can love you, and maybe that's enough." For a moment, he just stood there, looking at her like she was something miraculous. Then he closed the distance between them and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "You can love," he said against her hair, his voice breaking with emotion. "And that's more than enough. That's everything." They stood like that for a long time, holding each other in the shadow of the small cabin they had built together. When they finally pulled apart, Zeke kept his hands on her shoulders, looking at her with such intensity that her heart raced. "I love you too. I've loved you for weeks, maybe since the first day you came out here and sat with me in the ruins and didn't judge me for falling apart. You're brave and kind and stubborn and wonderful, and I don't deserve you, but I'm selfish enough to want you anyway." He took a shaky breath. "But I can't ask you to tie your life to mine when I'm about to lose everything. It wouldn't be fair. Life isn't fair, we both know that, but we get to choose how we face the unfairness, and I choose to face it with you." She cupped his face in her hands. "We'll find a way, Zeke, together." They spent the rest of that Sunday making plans. $55 was not enough, but it gave them something to work with. If Zeke could sell his cattle, even at poor prices, and if he could find enough work in the next few weeks, and if Theresa could save every penny, they might, just might, come close to what they needed. It was a desperate plan, but it was all they had. The next 3 weeks were the hardest of Theresa's life. She worked from before dawn until late at night, taking on extra tasks at the boarding house for additional pay. She mended clothes for other residents, took in washing from some of the town's families, did anything and everything she could to earn extra money. At night, her hands were so sore she could barely hold a fork, and she fell into bed exhausted beyond measure. Zeke was working just as hard, taking any job available. He hired himself out to other ranchers, worked at the blacksmith shop, helped repair the church roof. On the Sunday before the bank's deadline, he looked like a man pushed to his absolute limit, his face gaunt and his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. But they had raised $173. It was not enough. They were still $27 short. They sat on the steps of the new cabin, holding hands and staring at the sunset, and neither of them said what they were both thinking. They had failed. Despite everything they had done, all their work and sacrifice and hope, it was not enough. "I'm sorry," Zeke said finally. "I'm so sorry, Theresa. You gave up your mother's book, you worked yourself to exhaustion, and it was all for nothing." "Don't say that. It wasn't for nothing. We tried, we fought. That matters." But her voice was thick with unshed tears. They sat in silence as darkness fell, neither wanting to leave but neither knowing what to say. Finally, reluctantly, Theresa stood to go. She had to be back at the boarding house, and the ride to town would take nearly an hour. As she mounted the borrowed horse, Zeke stood and caught her hand one more time. "Marry me anyway," he said suddenly. "I know I'll have nothing to offer you. I'll be working for wages, and we'll probably have to live in some tiny room in town, and it'll be years before I can save enough to buy land again. But marry me, Theresa. I love you, and I don't want to face whatever comes next without you." Her heart felt like it was breaking and soaring at the same time. "Yes, of course, yes. I don't care about land or money or anything else. I just want to be with you." He pulled her down from the horse and kissed her, and it was sweet and desperate and full of promise. When they finally broke apart, they were both crying. "We'll make it work," she whispered. "Somehow we'll make it work." She rode back to town with her heart full and her hope fragile as glass, and found Mrs. Patterson waiting up for her in the boarding house kitchen. "You're late." "I was starting to worry." The older woman poured her a cup of coffee. "Sit down. You look ready to fall over." Theresa sat and found herself telling the whole story. About Zeke and the fire, about the work to rebuild, about falling in love and the bank's deadline and their desperate attempts to raise the money. About being $27 short and facing failure despite everything they had done. Mrs. Patterson listened without interrupting, her weathered face thoughtful. When Theresa finished, the older woman was quiet for a long moment. "This man, he's a good man, hard-working, honest, the best man I've ever known. And you love him, with all my heart." Mrs. Patterson stood and left the kitchen. She returned a few minutes later with a small metal box which she set on the table and opened. Inside was a stack of bills and coins. "My husband left me this when he died 10 years ago. I've been saving it, not sure what for. Maybe for this." She counted out money and pushed it across the table to Theresa. $30. That should cover what you need and a bit extra for the wedding." Theresa stared at the money, then at Mrs. Patterson, unable to speak. "Don't cry, girl. You've earned it, working as hard as you have these past months. And besides, I've grown fond of you. You remind me of myself at your age, brave and stubborn and willing to work for what you want." Mrs. Patterson's stern expression softened. "Go on, take it, but I want an invitation to the wedding." "I don't know how to thank you." Theresa's voice was choked with tears. "Thank me by being happy, and by bringing that young man of yours around sometime so I can make sure he's good enough for you." Mrs. Patterson smiled. Now go to bed. You've got a busy day tomorrow, including a trip to the bank, I imagine." Theresa did not sleep that night. She lay in her narrow bed, clutching the money and thinking about miracles, about the kindness of a stern boarding house owner with a soft heart, about the amazing fact that she and Zeke had actually done it, had raised enough money to save his land, about the future they could now build together. At first light, she was up and dressed. She told Mrs. Patterson she needed the day off, promising to work double the next day to make up for it. Then she took the money and rode as fast as she safely could to Zeke's property. She found him already up, sitting on the cabin steps and staring at nothing, the picture of a man facing his worst day. When he heard the horse, he looked up, confusion crossing his face. "Theresa, what are you doing here? It's Monday." She dismounted and ran to him, pulling the money from her pocket. We have enough. Mrs. Patterson loaned me $30. We can pay the bank today, Zeke. We can save your land." For a moment he just stared at her like he could not quite process what she was saying. Then he stood, took the money, counted it with shaking hands, and let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "We did it. Oh God, Theresa, we actually did it." He pulled her into his arms and spun her around, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. "I can't believe it. I thought it was over. I thought I'd lost everything. Not everything. Never everything. You still have me." They rode into Roswell together, straight to the bank. The banker, Mr. Thornton, looked surprised to see them, and even more surprised when Zeke counted out $200 on his desk. "I believe this satisfies my debt," Zeke said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. Mr. Thornton counted the money carefully, then stamped some papers and pushed them across the desk. "Paid in full. The land is yours free and clear, Mr. Turner. Congratulations." Outside the bank, Zeke took Theresa's hands and looked at her with such love that she felt her breath catch. "I told you to marry me last night, but I didn't do it properly, so let me do it right." He got down on one knee right there in the middle of the dusty street, not caring who saw. "Theresa Dawn, you've saved my life in more ways than one. You've given me hope when I had none, worked beside me when you didn't have to, and loved me when I had nothing to offer. You're the strongest, bravest, most wonderful woman I've ever known, and I love you more than I can say. Will you marry me? Will you build a life with me on that piece of land we just saved together?" "Yes." She pulled him to his feet and kissed him, not caring about the people stopping to watch. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Chen and half the town in attendance. Theresa wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Chen had helped her make, her first real attempt at sewing. It was not perfect, but it was hers, made with her own hands, and she was proud of it. Marcus Whitley even came, standing in the back of the church with an expression that might have been regret or might have been approval. Afterward, he shook Zeke's hand and nodded to Theresa. "You made the right choice," he said quietly. "Both of you, I hope you'll be very happy." The wedding celebration was held at the boarding house, with food prepared by a dozen different women from town, each contributing something. It was not fancy, but it was full of warmth and community and love, and Theresa felt happier than she had ever been in her life. That night, they went home to the cabin they had built together. It was small and simple, but it was theirs. Zeke carried her over the threshold, both of them laughing, and they stood in the middle of the main room, just holding each other and marveling at how far they had come. "I still cannot sew very well," Theresa said, looking up at him, "and my cooking is passable at best. But you can love," Zeke replied, echoing the words from his proposal. "And that's more than enough. That's everything." The first year of their marriage was not easy. They had saved the land, but they were still poor. They lived frugally, Zeke working the ranch and taking occasional jobs in town, Theresa continuing to work part-time for Mrs. Patterson to bring in extra money. They slowly built up Zeke's herd again, buying a few cattle at a time when they could afford it. They planted a vegetable garden, repaired fences, made improvements to the cabin bit by bit. It was hard work, but they did it together, and that made all the difference. On difficult days, when money was tight and the work seemed endless, they would sit on the porch after dinner, Zeke's arm around Theresa's shoulders, and talk about their dreams for the future. About the ranch they would build, the children they hoped to have, the life they were creating together. Theresa's cooking improved dramatically, though she joked that Zeke was too kind to tell her when something was truly terrible. Her sewing was still mediocre, but she could at least mend shirts and darn socks, which was more than she had been able to do when she first arrived in New Mexico. But more than any practical skill, she had learned something far more valuable. She had learned that she was strong, capable, and resilient. She had learned that love was not about perfection or meeting expectations, but about choosing each other every day, working together through difficulties, and building something meaningful side by side. In the spring of 1880, Theresa discovered she was pregnant. Zeke was overjoyed, immediately becoming protective and fussy, worrying about her working too hard. She laughed at his concern but was touched by it, seeing in his worry the depth of his love for her. Their son was born in December, a healthy baby boy with Zeke's dark eyes and Theresa's stubborn chin. They named him William, after Zeke's father, and he was the light of their lives. Theresa marveled at the tiny miracle in her arms, this child born of love and hope and hard work. Mrs. Chen came to stay with them for 2 weeks after the birth, helping with the household tasks and teaching Theresa about caring for an infant. Mrs. Patterson visited often, bringing gifts and advice and the news from town. "You've built a good life here, Mrs. Patterson said one afternoon, holding baby William while Theresa prepared dinner. "I'm proud of you, girl. You came here not knowing which end of a broom to hold, and now look at you. A home, a family, a future." "I couldn't have done it without help," Theresa said, stirring the stew on the stove. "Yours and Mrs. Chen's and so many others who showed kindness when I needed it most. That's what community is for. We help each other, and now you'll do the same for someone else who needs it, and so the circle continues." By 1882, the ranch was finally beginning to show real profit. Zeke's herd had grown substantially, and he had established a reputation as a reliable supplier of quality cattle. They were able to add onto the cabin, creating more space for their growing family. Theresa was pregnant again, and they talked excitedly about names and possibilities. Their daughter was born in August, a beautiful baby girl with Theresa's light brown hair and Zeke's ready smile. They named her Rose, after the town where their lives had intersected and their love had begun. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, challenges and joys. Some years were harder than others. There was a drought in 1883 that nearly broke them, and a winter in 1885 so harsh they lost a quarter of their herd. But they faced each difficulty together, drawing strength from each other and from the love they had built. They added more children to their family. Another son in 1886, whom they named Samuel after the kind shopkeeper who had helped them both in different ways. Twin girls in 1889, Sarah and Grace, who kept them busy and laughing with their mischievous antics. The cabin grew with their family, expanding from 2 rooms to 6, becoming a real house. The ranch grew too, as they were able to buy adjoining property and expand their operations. Zeke hired hands to help with the work, young cowboys who reminded Theresa of Zeke when she had first met him, full of dreams and determination. In 1890, Theresa finally mastered the art of sewing, creating beautiful dresses for her daughters and shirts for her sons. She laughed about it with Zeke one evening, remembering how terrified she had been of the prospect when she first arrived. "I told you that you could learn anything you set your mind to," he said, pulling her close. "And I told you I couldn't cook or sew," she replied. "But it turned out I could love, and that was enough to build everything else on." As the years passed, they watched Roswell grow from a small frontier town into a thriving community. They became pillars of that community themselves, known for their generosity and their willingness to help others. They never forgot what it felt like to have nothing, to face ruin and despair, and so they helped others who found themselves in similar situations. They took in young ranch hands who needed training and a place to stay. They loaned money to neighbors facing hard times, never charging interest and often forgiving the debt entirely if circumstances warranted. They supported the church and the school, believing in the importance of education and community. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in 1892, and Mrs. Patterson followed her in 1895. Both women left their mark on Theresa's life, and she mourned them deeply while being grateful for all they had taught her. She passed those lessons on to her own daughters, teaching them that a woman could be strong and capable, that practical skills were valuable but not more important than kindness and courage. In 1898, their oldest son William announced he wanted to start his own ranch. He was only 18, but Zeke saw in him the same determination he had possessed at that age. Together, they helped William buy a piece of property and get started, and Theresa felt the circle completing itself as she watched her son face the same challenges his father had overcome. Marcus Whitley died in 1900, leaving his ranch to a distant cousin. Theresa attended his funeral and was surprised to find herself sad. He had not been a bad man, just a lonely one who had closed his heart to the possibility of love. She said a prayer for him, hoping he had found peace. As the new century dawned, Theresa and Zeke found themselves grandparents, with William's wife giving birth to a baby boy. They held their grandson and marveled at how much life had changed since that day in 1878 when a desperate mail-order bride and a ruined cowboy had met in the aftermath of disaster. "You ever regret it?" Zeke asked her one evening as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert sky in brilliant colors. "Giving up your old life, coming out here, choosing me when I had nothing, not for a single moment." She leaned against his shoulder, comfortable in the way of long partnership. "You gave me everything that matters. Love, family, purpose, a real home. What more could anyone want? I think I got the better end of the bargain," he said, kissing the top of her head. "You saved my life, Theresa, literally and figuratively. We saved each other, that's what love does." They sat in companionable silence, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear their children laughing, the sounds of family and home and life continuing forward. In 1905, they celebrated their 27th wedding anniversary with all 5 of their children and 3 grandchildren present. It was a noisy, chaotic, wonderful gathering that lasted all day and into the evening. As Theresa looked around at the faces of the people she loved most, she thought about the terrified young woman she had been when she first arrived in Roswell, so sure she had made a terrible mistake, so convinced she had nothing to offer. That young woman could never have imagined this life, this abundance of love and family and purpose. She could never have known that her inability to cook or sew would not matter, that her capacity to love would be enough to build a life more rich and fulfilling than any she could have had in Boston society. Late that night, after everyone had left or gone to bed, Theresa and Zeke sat on their porch one more time, holding hands and watching the moon rise. 27 years, Zeke mused. Sometimes it feels like just yesterday that you showed up at my burned-out ranch with a basket of food and kind words. Other times, it feels like we've been together forever. Both are true, Theresa said. Every day with you feels new but also like coming home. You know what I remember most from that first day? Zeke turned to look at her, his eyes still as warm and full of love as they had been decades ago. You didn't look at me with pity. You looked at me like I was a person, not a tragedy, like I still had value even though I'd lost everything. That meant more than you could ever know. I saw a man who was hurting but not broken, a man with strength and dignity even in the worst moment of his life. How could I not fall in love with that? They went inside eventually, to the bedroom in the house they had built together, and fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of nights before. Outside, the desert night was peaceful and still, the stars brilliant in the clear sky. The years continued to pass, bringing more grandchildren and eventually great-grandchildren. The ranch continued to prosper under their management, though they gradually turned more of the work over to their children as age slowed them down. But they never stopped working entirely, never stopped being active participants in the life they had built. In 1912, on a warm spring day, Zeke and Theresa took a ride out to the site where his original house had stood. The land had long since recovered from the fire, new grass covering the scars, wildflowers blooming where ashes had once been. They stood together, looking at the place where their story had truly begun, where desperation and kindness had first met. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Theresa asked. "When I offered you food and you asked why I would help a stranger, you said maybe we weren't such strangers after all, that you understood a little bit about watching your world burn down." Zeke put his arm around her waist. "You were right. We understood each other from the beginning, even before we knew it. I think some souls recognize each other," Theresa said thoughtfully. "They find each other even across impossible circumstances, even when logic says they should never meet. We were meant to find each other, Zeke. I've always believed that, so have I." He kissed her gently. "Best thing I ever did was accept your help that day. Best decision I ever made was falling in love with you." They stood there for a long time, remembering and grateful, before riding back to the ranch where their family waited. That evening, surrounded by children and grandchildren, they told the story of how they met, as they had done many times before. The young ones listened with wide eyes, amazed that their strong, capable grandparents had once been young and frightened and unsure. "The most important thing to remember," Theresa told them at the end of the story, "is that your worth is not defined by what you can do or what skills you have. Those things can be learned. Your worth comes from who you are, from your capacity to love and be kind and to work hard for the things that matter. Everything else builds from there. Your grandmother couldn't cook or sew when I met her," Zeke added with a smile. "But she could love, and that was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything." In 1920, they celebrated their 42nd wedding anniversary quietly, just the two of them. Zeke was 70 now, his hair completely white, his movements slower than they had once been. Theresa was 64, her own hair streaked with silver, her hands marked by decades of work. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the young cowboy and the mail-order bride who had taken a chance on love when they had nothing else. "If you could go back and tell that scared young woman from Boston what her life would become, what would you say?" Zeke asked her. Theresa thought about it. "I'd tell her that fear is normal but shouldn't be in charge, that taking risks is terrifying but necessary. That real strength isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about being willing to try, to fail, to learn, and to try again." She paused. "And I'd tell her that love, real love, is worth any sacrifice. That when you find someone who sees you truly and loves you anyway, you hold on to them with everything you have." "What would you tell that ruined cowboy sitting in the ashes of his life?" he asked. "I'd tell him that nothing is ever truly over as long as you're still breathing. That rock bottom is a foundation you can build on if you have the courage. That asking for help isn't weakness, it's wisdom." She smiled. "And I'd tell him that the best things in life often come from the worst moments, if you can stay open to the possibilities." As winter approached in 1925, Zeke's health began to fail. He fought it with characteristic stubbornness, not wanting to leave Theresa or the life they had built. But in December, just after their 47th anniversary, he took a turn for the worse. Surrounded by his family, with Theresa holding his hand, he slipped away peacefully. Theresa grieved deeply, as one grieves for the loss of half of themselves. They had been partners for nearly half a century, had built a life and a family and a legacy together. The house felt empty without him, the bed too large, the silence too loud. But she was not alone. Her children rallied around her, and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren filled the house with life and noise and love. They reminded her that Zeke lived on in all of them, in the values he had instilled, in the work ethic he had demonstrated, in the love he had given so freely. Theresa lived for another 8 years, continuing to be active in the ranch and in the lives of her family. She told stories about Zeke, keeping his memory alive for the youngest generation who had never known him. She taught her granddaughters to be brave and independent, to value themselves for more than traditional accomplishments. She taught her grandsons to be gentle and kind, to understand that real strength included the capacity for love and compassion. On a warm spring day in 1933, at the age of 77, Theresa Dawn Turner passed away in her sleep. She was buried next to Zeke on the ridge above the north pasture, the place he had told her his father was buried, the place that overlooked the land they had fought so hard to save and had built into something lasting. At her funeral, their oldest son William spoke about his parents' love story, about how a mail-order bride and a ruined cowboy had taken a chance on each other and built something extraordinary. He spoke about how his mother had come to New Mexico thinking she had nothing to offer, and how his father had shown her that love was enough to build everything else on. "They taught us that our value isn't in what we can do, but in who we choose to be," he said. "They showed us that real strength is in staying open to love even when life has knocked you down. They proved that two people with courage and commitment can overcome anything, can build a good life even from ashes and ruin." The ranch continued under the management of their children and grandchildren, each generation adding to what Zeke and Theresa had started. The story of how they met, how they fell in love, how they built everything from nothing, became family legend, passed down through the generations. Decades later, their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that same ridge where they were buried and look out over the thriving ranch, and they would tell the story to their own children. About the woman who traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to find her true match in the ruins of a fire. About the man who lost everything but found the greatest treasure in the form of a kind heart and a brave spirit. About two people who proved that love, real love, was indeed enough to build a life on. The house they built together still stood, expanded over the years but with its original 2 rooms preserved as they had been. Families would gather there for holidays and celebrations, and someone would always point out the hearth that Zeke and Theresa had built together, stone by stone, the foundation upon which everything else had been constructed. And on quiet evenings, when the desert wind whispered through the grass and the stars blazed overhead. It was easy to imagine two figures sitting on the porch, holding hands and watching the sunset, their love eternal as the land they had claimed and the legacy they had left behind. The story of Theresa and Zeke became more than just family history. It became a testament to the power of human resilience, to the importance of kindness, to the truth that what we can do matters less than who we choose to be and how we choose to love. In a world that often values accomplishment over character, their story remained a reminder that the greatest achievement is not wealth or status or skill, but the ability to love truly and to build something meaningful with another person. She said, "I cannot cook or sew." The story always ended. The cowboy replied, "But you can love, and that's enough." And it was. It was more than enough. It was everything.